it stops you cold, doesn't it?
For this reason, a woman ought to have authority on her head, because of the angels.
It's one of those verses where you're just reading along in the New Testament, maybe nodding your head at the general instructions, and then wham, you hit a total conceptual wall.
1 Corinthians chapter 11. It really does sound like something out of a sci-fi novel or a mystic's fever dream.
Right. You've got gender politics, you've got ancient fashion rules about veils, and then suddenly angels monitoring the dress code.
It has baffled scholars for centuries. And it's not just the mention of the angels, it's the linguistic absurdity of the phrasing itself. Paul is usually surgical with his theological terms, but here he says a woman must have exousia authority on her head.
He doesn't say submission.
Exactly. He doesn't say a veil either. He uses the active noun for power, authority, and then he just casually adds the kicker because of the angels.
And that is exactly where the tension explodes, because for hundreds of years, translators and commentators looked at that Greek word exousia, which clearly means power or the authority to act, and they effectively said, well, that can't be right.
They just didn't trust the text.
They didn't trust that Paul could possibly mean that a woman possesses authority in that specific context. So if you look at the King James Version or even, some modern translations, they insert words that simply are not in the Greek text. They change have authority to have a sign of authority, or even worse, a sign of submission.
Which completely flips the meaning. I mean, it turns I have power into I am under power.
Precisely. It reverses the entire polarity of the verse. And this forces us to ask a massive, uncomfortable question right at the start of this deep dive. Are we reading a text that was designed to suppress women, or has history obscured a text that was actually attributing power to them in the midst of cosmic witnesses?
That is the stake we are driving into the ground today. We're looking at 1 Corinthians 11, and to the listener, I promise you, this isn't just about hats or hairstyles or ancient fashion tips.
Yeah.
This is about whether our worship acknowledges a cosmic order, literally the angels watching us, or whether it just dissolves into social chaos.
Right. We are looking at what happens when the culture of the world, its status games, its power moves, its hierarchies, when all of that bleeds into the sanctuary.
So let's get right into it. We are tackling 1 Corinthians chapter 11, and we've got a massive stack of research today. We've stripped down 3 heavy-hitting commentaries to really get to the bottom of this. We have Gordon Fee, who represents the evangelical textual criticism side. We have David Garland bringing the Roman social history. And we have Anthony Thiselton bringing the heavy philosophical artillery.
It's a powerhouse lineup, and we really need all 3 of them because they come at this from completely different angles. Frankly, this chapter is just too complex for a single lens.
It really is. But before we parse the Greek, let's set the scene. Where does chapter 11 sit in the letter? Because Paul has been talking about meat and idols for 3 solid chapters.
Yeah, chapters 8, 9, and 10 were all about the outside world. The questions were like, can I eat meat offered to Zeus? Can I go to a dinner party with my pagan boss? It was all about how the church interacts with the city of Corinth. But here in chapter 11, Paul pivots. He walks inside the house church.
He shuts the door to the street.
He shuts the door. Now we are looking at the internal assembly. And what he finds is that the chaos of the city has followed them inside. The chapter is split into 2 halves that, at first glance, look like they have nothing to do with each other. You have verses 2 through 16, which are about gender, decorum, head coverings, hair length, men and women praying. And then verses 17 through 34 are about the Lord's Supper. Eating and drinking.
So one is about fashion and the other is about food.
Exactly, but they are thematically identical.
Yes.
You have to look at the unifying thread. In both halves, you have the strong shaming the weak. So in the first half, it's the liberated spiritual elites, likely the women who felt empowered by the spirit-blurring gender lines in a way that shames traditional people or shames their husbands. In the second half, it is the wealthy patrons shaming the poor laborers at the communion table.
So the synthesis of the whole chapter is essentially disorder versus decorum, or maybe more accurately, self-assertion versus regard for the other.
Precisely. And the tone shifts dramatically between these 2 sections. It's a violent pivot. Verse 2 starts with, I praise you for remembering me and holding to the traditions. Scholars call this a captatio benevolentiae.
A what?
Captatio benevolentiae. It's a classic rhetorical strategy, basically buttering them up before you hit them with the criticism. It's like, I love what you've done with the place, but
the kitchen is on fire. The compliment sandwich.
The compliment sandwich, exactly. But then look at verse 17. He completely drops the act. He says, In the following directives, I have no praise for you. He moves from I praise you to I do not praise you.
He's taking the gloves off.
He has to, because the Lord's Supper disaster, which we will definitely get to, wasn't just a mistake. It was destroying the very nature of the church.
Okay, so before we get into the actual text, let's brief you, the listener, on our guides today. We need to understand their commentary DNA because they come at this from very different angles. Let's start with Gordon D. Fee.
Fee is a giant in the field. He's writing for the NICNT series. He's Pentecostal, which makes him very sensitive to the work of the Spirit in the text, but he's also a rigorous textual critic. His lens for this entire chapter is something called over-realized eschatology.
Let's break that down. Over-realized eschatology.
It sounds incredibly fancy, but it's a simple concept. Eschatology is just the study of the end times heaven, the resurrection, the final state. Fee argues that the Corinthians thought they had already arrived. They believed they were already living in the resurrection state, spiritually speaking. They thought they were like the angels.
And angels don't have gender. Jesus said in the resurrection, they neither marry nor are given in marriage.
Correct. So Fee argues that the Corinthians were tossing aside their head coverings and their gender norms because they thought we are spiritual beings now. Bodies don't matter. Gender is obsolete.
So for Fee, Paul is trying to bring them back down to earth.
Yes. And Fee is also a massive champion for protecting the text from patriarchal abuse. He fights very hard against hierarchical readings. As we'll see, he is the main proponent that the Greek word kephale means source and not leader.
Okay, next up is David E. Garland.
Garland writes for the BECNT series. He is a historian and a socio-rhetorical scholar. If Fee is looking at their theology, Garland is looking at their street culture. He focuses heavily on the honor and shame culture of the Roman Mediterranean. He is constantly asking the question, how would this behavior look to a pagan walking past the door?
And he has a very specific take on the covering issue, right?
He does. He completely rejects the idea that this is just about hairstyles. He insists Paul is talking about material head coverings, veils for women, and specifically the absence of head coverings for men. He brings in this fascinating archaeological evidence about Roman men pulling their togas over their heads.
We'll definitely unpack that toga-pulling image in a minute. And finally, Anthony C. Thiselton.
Thiselton is the philosopher of the group. He writes for the NIGTC, which deals with the Greek text in extreme detail. He uses speech act theory and semiotics, which is the study of signs. He even quotes Roland Barthes regarding the fashion system.
So he treats clothes as a language.
Exactly. Clothes speak. They signal social intent. Thiselton tries to transcend the whole binary argument of egalitarian versus complementarian. He emphasizes reciprocity. He wants to know, does your dress signal respect for the other person, or does it signal that you are available and looking for attention?
Okay, let's get into the text. Part 1, the head covering dispute, verses 2 through 16. And we have to start with the word that has launched 1,000 dissertations. Verse 3, the head of every man is Christ, and the head of the woman is the man.
And the Greek word there is kephalon.
And the fight is, does kephale mean boss or leader, or does it mean something else entirely? Because how we define this single word shapes the theology of half the human race.
This is a massive philological war. Let's look at how our three scholars handle it. Gordon Fee takes the egalitarian defense. He argues that kephale primarily means source, like the head of a river.
A river source.
Oh, right. He cites Cyril of Alexandria and points out that Paul immediately appeals to Genesis chapter 2. In Genesis, the woman was taken out of the man. She came from him. So Fee argues when Paul says man is the head of woman, he isn't establishing a hierarchy or a chain of command. He is stating a creational fact. Man is the source of woman's existence. It's about derivation, not authority.
That changes the reading entirely. It removes the boss element completely. But Garland disagrees.
Garland rejects source as the primary meaning. He says the lexicographical evidence, the dictionary definitions from that time period, just doesn't support source as a common metaphor for people. But, and this is crucial, he also rejects the modern notion of boss or ruler.
So if it's not source and it's not boss, what is it?
Garland suggests preeminent or foremost. He says Paul is playing on the anatomical metaphor. Think about your actual physical head. It is the most visible part of you. It is the part that represents you. Garland ties this to honor and shame. You don't shame your source. That doesn't make much sense linguistically. But you do shame your head in the sense of your dignity or your representative.
And Thiselton. Where does the philosopher land?
Thiselton, true to form, refuses to let us pick just one. He argues for a polymorphous concept, meaning it has many shapes. He talks about synecdoche.
Synecdoche. That is a $10 word.
It just means the part standing for the whole. Like when we say we're counting heads, we mean we're counting people. Thiselton says head implies prominence, responsibility, and origin all at once. He says we trap ourselves in a language game when we force Paul to choose between source and authority. It's about representation. The man is the public representative of the creation order in a specific way, just as Christ is the representative of God.
So we have source from Fee, preeminent representative from Garland, and a complex mix of prominence and representation from Thiselton. Now let's apply this to the actual problem on the ground in Corinth. Paul talks about men praying with their heads covered and women praying with their heads uncovered. What exactly were they wearing?
Or not wearing. This is where the historical reconstruction gets really interesting. Let's look at the men first. Verse 4 says a man dishonors his head if he prays having down from the head.
Having down from the head. That is a very weird phrase.
It's literal Greek, katakafali ekin. Garland points out that most translations just smooth this over to say with his head covered. But Garland digs into the Roman background. We have statues from Corinth of the Emperor Augustus and other pious Roman men offering sacrifices. And in every single one of them, they have pulled their toga up over their head.
Like a hoodie.
Exactly like a hoodie. It's called capit velato with covered head. In Roman pagan culture, pulling the toga over your head was a sign of piety. It signaled that you were devout, you were in the presence of the gods, you were blocking out distractions. It was a high-status Roman religious move.
So why does Paul forbid it? If it means you're being devout, wouldn't Paul want that?
Garland argues Paul forbids it precisely because it looks like pagan piety. If a Christian man stands up to prophesy and pulls his toga over his head, he looks like he is worshiping Jupiter or honoring the emperor. He is shaming Christ by mimicking pagan devotion. He needs to uncover his head to show he is separate from that idolatrous world.
That makes so much sense. It's not about wearing hats in church. It's about syncretism. It's about not looking like the cult down the street. Now, what about the women?
The women are the bigger issue here. Verse 5 says a woman shames her head if she prays uncovered.
Fee has a theory about hairstyles here, right?
Yes, Fee discusses the hairstyle theory. There is evidence that loosening the hair, letting it hang wild and disheveled, was heavily associated with the cult of Dionysus.
The party god.
The god of frenzy, yeah. Women in those cults would let their hair fly loose to show they were in an ecstatic trance. It also signaled loose morals. Fee, however, leans heavily into his overrealized eschatology theory. He thinks these Corinthian women were spiritualists. They believed that in the spirit there is neither male nor female. So they were intentionally removing their veils or unbinding their hair to say, I am spiritually equal to a man. I don't need these gender symbols anymore.
They were making a theological statement through their fashion.
Exactly. And Paul is saying you are going too far. But Thiselton brings us back to semiotics. He says, ultimately, it doesn't really matter if it was a piece of cloth or a hairstyle. What matters is the signal.
The signal, what it communicates to the room.
Right. In that culture, a woman's hair was considered her glory and highly sexualized.
Okay.
To walk into a public assembly with your head uncovered or your hair unbound signaled sexual availability. It signaled a lack of self-control. Thiselton's point is devastating here. He says you cannot stand up to lead the people of God in prayer while simultaneously dressing in a way that signals you are sexually available. It creates a massive contradiction in the worship. It distracts from God.
So it is about the semiotics of self-giving.
Yeah.
If you are leading worship, you shouldn't be drawing the male gaze to yourself.
Right. It's a distraction. And Garland adds that for a married woman to do this was a direct shame to her husband. It was like saying, I am acting like a single woman or a courtesan, which publicly dishonors her head, meaning her husband.
This leads us right into the theology of creation in verses 7 through 9. Paul says man is the image and glory of God, but woman is the glory of man. I have to ask, because we're reading this today, is this a demotion for women? It sounds like man is up here with God and woman is down here with man.
It certainly sounds that way to modern ears, but Fee is adamant. This is about creation order, not spiritual status or value. He says Paul is simply reading the narrative of Genesis 2. Man was created directly from the dust glory of God. Woman was created from the man glory of man. It's a statement of origin.
She came from him, so she reflects him.
Yes. But Thiselton adds a brilliant nuance about the word glory. He says glory here means honor or reputation. A woman's behavior reflects on her husband's reputation. If she acts shamefully, he is shamed. If she acts honorably, he is honored. It's about public perception in a shame and honor society. It's not about ontological value. Paul isn't saying she has less of God's image. He is saying her social conduct has a direct blast radius on her husband's reputation.
Okay, now we arrive at the verse we started with, verse 10. For this reason, a woman ought to have authority over her head because of the angels. Let's unpack the angels first. What are they doing here?
Garland gives us the best context here. He cites texts from Qumran, the Dead Sea Scrolls. The Jewish community believed that angels were actually present in the worship assembly. They were the guardians of the cosmic order.
So when the church gathers, the angels are literally in the room.
They are the audience, and angels are obsessed with order. They witness creation. They know the boundaries. Garland argues that for a woman to blur the gender lines in the presence of the angels is an offense to the cosmic order. It's confusing the categories of creation that the angels are there to uphold.
It's like showing up to a royal wedding in a bathing suit. It offends the dignity of the occasion.
Precisely. But here is the twist. The verse says she must have exousia authority on her head. Fee makes a crucial point here. Exousia is an active noun. It is her authority.
Not authority over her.
No. In Greek, to have authority means you possess the power. Fee suggests something really radical. He thinks Paul might be quoting the Corinthians' own catchphrase back to them. The women might have been saying, "We have authority to do whatever we want." And Paul says, "Yes, you have authority." And the symbol of that authority, the thing that allows you to stand up and prophesy without being stoned or shamed, is the covering.
So the covering isn't a muzzle, it represents a microphone.
That is a brilliant way to put it. The covering legitimizes her speech. If she stands up uncovered, she is dismissed as a loose woman. If she stands up covered, she retains her dignity and her absolute right to speak.
Thiselton takes a slightly different angle on exousia. He connects it to self-mastery. He says the woman needs control over her head. By dressing modestly, she retains control over her own person. She prevents herself from becoming an object of the male gaze. She asserts her dignity against a culture that would sexualize her.
Which is a very empowering reading. She is taking charge of how she is perceived.
But then, just when Paul seems to be locking down all these distinctions, he pivots again in verse 11. Nevertheless, the nevertheless is the key to everything, verse 11. Nevertheless, in the Lord, woman is not independent of man, nor is man independent of woman.
He pulls the ripcord on the creation argument.
He really does. He just spent 10 verses arguing from Genesis 2. Woman came from man. Now in verse 12, he appealed to biology. For as woman came from man, so also man is born of woman.
Touché, Paul. Every man, even the most chauvinist one, had a mother.
Exactly. He flattens the hierarchy with biological reality. The first man came from a woman, but every man since has come through a woman. And then the theological capstone, and all things are from God.
So the final word is interdependence.
Mutual dependence. The hierarchy is flattened by the Lord. He establishes the distinction to maintain order, but he establishes interdependence to maintain unity. That wraps up the first half. Now we move to the second half. The Lord's Supper disaster, verses 17 through 34. And disaster really is the right word. Yeah. Paul literally says, your meetings do more harm than good.
Imagine a pastor saying that to a congregation today, just standing up and saying, it would be better if you just didn't meet.
What was actually happening? Was it a theological argument? I think I grew up assuming the Corinthians were just getting drunk on the communion wine and maybe treating the ritual too casually.
Yeah.
But our scholars say it is much deeper than that.
It wasn't just a rowdy party. It was sociological warfare. Garland paints the scene vividly, and you really have to understand the architecture of a Roman villa to understand the text here.
The house church.
Right. The host, probably a wealthy member of the church, like Gaius or Stephanus, has a house. The main dining room in a Roman villa is called the triclinium.
Triclinium.
It literally means 3 couches. It's a U-shaped dining arrangement. It can hold maybe 9, possibly 12 people comfortably. Now, who gets to sit there?
The VIPs.
The rich.
Yeah.
The influential. The host's close friends. They arrive early because they have leisure time. They recline on couches and are served the absolute best food and wine. But the church is bigger than 12 people. Where does everyone else go?
The atrium.
It's the atrium. The courtyard, it is outside the dining room. They might have to stand or sit on the floor. And these are the slaves, the laborers, the tradesmen, the people who can't get off work until sunset. They arrive late.
So the rich are already eating.
The rich have been eating for hours. This is what Garland calls the private supper idion deipnon. They are eating their own food, and when the poor arrive, the food is gone, or they are just given scraps.
So you literally have the wealthy gorging themselves in the dining room, and the poor are hungry out in the hallway.
Exactly. This last one points out this perfectly mirrors the Roman Eranos meals. Those were club meals where what you ate depended entirely on what you paid or your social status. But this is supposed to be the Lord's Supper.
And Fee says this despises the Church of God.
Fee emphasizes that the sin here is the humiliation of the have-nots by the haves. Paul asks, "Do you not have homes to eat and drink in? If you want a private banquet, stay home. But when you come together, it is supposed to be a common meal."
This gives so much power to verses 23 through 26. Paul recites the liturgy on the night he was betrayed. We've all heard this 1,000 times in church. But in this specific context, it sounds like a weapon.
It is a weapon. Paul isn't just reciting history for the sake of it. He is contrasting Jesus with the Corinthians. Think about it. Jesus said, "This is my body given for others." It is complete self-giving. But the Corinthians are stuffing their bodies in front of others. It's entirely self-serving. Their action creates a direct contradiction to the gospel they are supposedly celebrating. You cannot celebrate a self-giving God with a self-serving meal.
That hits incredibly hard. And it leads right into the scary verses. Verse 27, "Whoever eats the bread or drinks the cup of the Lord in an unworthy manner will be guilty of sinning against the body and blood of the Lord." I know people who are absolutely terrified of this verse. They think, I lost my temper in traffic this morning. I can't take communion.
That is a tragic misunderstanding, and our commentators clear this up beautifully. Fee is very specific about the Greek here. Unworthy manner and axios is an adverb. It describes the manner of eating. Specifically, eating divisively. It has nothing to do with whether you are personally worthy or sinless. None of us are worthy in that sense. It has to do with how you are eating the meal in that moment.
And how are they eating?
Divisively. Selfishly. Garland says to eat unworthily is to eat in a way that creates factions. If you are snubbing the poor brother across the room while you eat the bread of unity, you are eating unworthily.
Then Paul says we must discern the body in verse 29. "For those who eat and drink without discerning the body of Christ, eat and drink judgment on themselves."
Growing up, I always thought discerning the body meant realizing the cracker is spiritually Jesus.
Right, that is the traditional sacramental view. But look at the context. What body has Paul been talking about throughout 1 Corinthians?
The church.
The church, the body of Christ. Fee, Garland, and Thiselton all agree on this. To discern the body means to look around the room and recognize that the poor brother sitting next to you or standing out in the atrium is a member of Christ.
It means recognizing the community.
Yes. Thiselton says it is recognizing the distinctiveness of the Christian community as a place of mutual sharing, unlike the Roman world of status and hierarchy.
And Garland points out the consequences, actual physical judgment. That is why many among you are weak and sick.
He views this as a physical judgment for a social sin. If you humiliate the poor, you are attacking the body of Christ. That brings a whole new weight to the passing of the peace or the greeting time in church. It's not just about being friendly, it is discerning the body.
Exactly.
Let's do a commentary showdown. We've seen how they handle all the individual details. How do they stack up on the big picture? Let's start with the battle for head or kephale.
It is a fascinating spectrum. Think of it this way. Fee is fighting a theological battle. He wants source because he is desperate to save Paul from being labeled a misogynist. He wants to ensure there is absolutely no ontological hierarchy, so he digs deep into the ancient uses where head meant source.
He's protecting the text from abuse.
Yes, Garland is more comfortable with hierarchy, but he contextualizes it completely. He says, look, this is Roman honor and shame culture. He is comfortable with preeminent because he doesn't see it as universal male rule, but as first-century etiquette. He argues we can't strip Paul of his historical context just to make him palatable to modern readers.
And Thiselton?
Thiselton wins points for sophistication. He refuses to let us choose just one meaning. He argues for a language game where head means prominence, responsibility, and origin all at once. He believes words are polymorphous. They carry multiple meanings depending on the sentence and the social setting.
What about the tone of the solution? How do they advise we actually apply this?
Fee is the most theological. The Spirit levels the playing field, but we must respect creation. Garland is the most pragmatic. Don't dress like a pagan or a loose woman, and make sure you feed the poor. His advice feels very practical for a church planter in a hostile city.
It's very concrete.
And Thiselton is the most philosophical. It is about the semiotics of self-giving. Signify respect for the other in how you dress and how you eat.
So if we synthesize all this, the head coverings, the angels, the rich and the poor, the bread and the wine, what is the big idea of chapter 11?
I think if we pull all the threads together, it is this. Christian worship is the public renunciation of status for the sake of the other.
That is powerful. Say it again.
Christian worship is the public renunciation of status for the sake of the other.
Whether it's a woman veiling her glory, her hair, to prevent sexual distraction, or a rich man curbing his appetite to ensure the poor are fed, the principle is the exact same. My rights, my freedom, are secondary to the body's unity.
It is the upside-down kingdom. The world says flaunt what you have. Paul says cover it up or give it away if it hurts your brother.
Exactly. So how do we bridge this to today? We don't usually wear veils, and we don't typically eat full banquets during communion. What is the modern veil?
We don't wear veils, but we absolutely have codes. The Thiselton semiotics apply perfectly here. If you come to church dressed to sexually provoke men or women, or to flaunt extreme wealth, you are violating the principle of 1 Corinthians 11. You are centering the service on you rather than God or the neighbor.
You are making the service about you. You are centering the gaze on yourself. Or, if you come dressed to flaunt extreme wealth, say, wearing a watch that costs more than someone's car, you are signaling status. You are visually creating a have and have not dynamic. That's a direct violation of 1 Corinthians 11.
And the modern supper.
The specific application is economic segregation. Garland's image of the private supper really haunts me. If a church structure, our cliques, our events, our locations, makes a poor person feel humiliated or invisible, we are eating and drinking judgment on ourselves.
It really challenges the country club church mentality. The communion table is the great equalizer. It is the one place where the CEO and the janitors stand next to each other and eat the exact same meal of grace.
It challenges us to look at our church dynamics. Are we discerning the body?
And not just the people we like, the whole body.
This has been a heavy but incredibly necessary deep dive. I want to leave the listener with a provocative thought.
Go for it. If the Apostle Paul walked into your church next Sunday, what would he see? Would he see a body acting as one interdependent, covering each other's shame, feeding each other? Or would he see a collection of private individuals consuming religious goods alongside people they don't actually know or care about?
That is the question. Are we a body, or are we just a crowd in a room?
Paul has dealt with the visible disorder here, the head coverings and the supper, but next time, in chapter 12, he goes after the invisible disorder, the chaotic competition of spiritual gifts.
You won't want to miss that. Thanks for joining us for the deep dive.
See you next time.